It's time for The Verdict. The Verdict is a lively discussion of current events and legal issues pertinent to Oklahomans. The Verdict is hosted by Kent Myers and Mick Cornett. It's time for The Verdict.
And welcome once again to The Verdict. Glad you're with us. I'm Mick Cornett. My co-host is one of Oklahoma's top legal experts, Kent Myers.
Today we're going to focus on the United States Senate race in Oklahoma one more time, but certainly not the last time. We have been privileged to have Dr. Tom Coburn on one other occasion when he was in his primary campaign, and that of course is now over, decisively over. And we are pleased he's chosen to join us again to discuss the Senate race and the issues involved in the Senate race prior to the general election. This race is getting national attention. It is going to be a closely contested, hard-fought race by both parties, and we wanted our viewers today to have an opportunity to hear Tom Coburn talk to you about what he's got in mind for this race, what he's got in mind for Oklahoma, what he thinks needs attention, and what the viewers ought to know about making a choice in November.
Won't be long. Dr. Tom Coburn, today's guest on The Verdict. We'll be right back. Welcome back to The Verdict. Mick Cornett with Kent Myers. Kent's going to introduce our guest.
We are very pleased today to have a familiar face, a person that is well known to you, and I'll make the introduction correspondingly short. Dr. Tom Coburn is here with us. He's the Republican nominee for the United States Senate here in Oklahoma. He's a former three-term congressman from the 2nd District who voluntarily kept his commitment to stick to 3 terms and retired himself. The voters did not do that. He is now the Republican nominee running for the United States Senate position here. He's been described as a budget hawk, and one interesting fact I noticed from his bio is that he declined when he left Congress to take his pension or health benefits from the government, and just said that there ought to be better ways to spend your money than giving it to him for those purposes. So he puts his money literally where his mouth is. He's back for another visit on The Verdict, and we are really pleased to have you. Thank you for joining us again.
Glad to be here with you guys.
Congratulations on the primary win.
Thank you.
Were you surprised, if not by the victory, by the margin?
Well, we were very pleased with the margin, and I think Oklahomans get the problems that I've been talking about and want somebody that is going to have the courage to try to address those. And I think Republicans identified with that, and we were very fortunate. We had 2 strong candidates, both great men, that we ran against. I actually developed a very fond personal relationship with Kirk Humphreys. I think he's a wonderful, wonderful man.
Well, he's done a wonderful job in Oklahoma City and in other things that he has done. What do you think, if you could be issue-oriented a little bit, what do you think were the primary issue reasons that the Republican voters picked you without a runoff to be their candidate?
Well, I probably one that I have the ability to attract conservative Democrat votes and have done that in the past. Number 2 is I talked about the real issues that are facing our country and Oklahoma, and I didn't make politics personal. You know, we have to have a new day in this country where we really talk about the serious problems ahead of us. What you get in campaigning is what you're going to get in government. And we need to remember that, and I think we're sorely lacking leadership, and my goal is to try to offer that, not just for Oklahoma, but for our country.
You imposed self-imposed term limits upon yourself, served 3 terms in Congress, then left as you had promised initially when you ran, and now you are saying that if you're elected to the United States Senate, you would serve no more than 2 terms. Why do you feel so strongly in self-imposed term limits, and do you feel like it hurts your chances of rising in Senate leadership?
No, look, leadership, as described in the U.S. Senate, is all based on what career politicians have set the rules in the Senate. There's nothing like that in the Constitution. Matter of fact, the Constitution says my vote should be just as powerful as any other senator from any other state. Term limits set you free to do what you need to do and what is best for the country, rather than making your job or your goal to fit into a political framework so that over a period of time you acquire more power. Well, if you're known as an independent-minded thinker and you know the rules of the Senate, you can establish just as much power as any committee chairman if in fact you're willing to do that. And we did that in the House, and we had a tremendous following of the things that we did. We passed 11 separate laws that were signed by President Clinton during my time. Nobody else in the House did that, and we did that because we refused to conform to the rules directly, but rather chose to conform to the Constitution. And leadership matters, and I think it's sorely lacking today in our country and in the U.S. Senate. And term limits gives you the freedom to do what you know is in the best long-term interest of the country, not what is in the best long-term interest of your political career.
Some friends and perhaps opponents have referred to you in using a word maverick. We put a definition of maverick up just before we went into this session. What do you say to the label maverick?
Well, I say thank you. Look, our obligation as we represent Oklahoma and Washington is to do what's in the best long-term interest for the citizens of this country. And unfortunately, the political scenario that we find ourselves in this country today is that the vast majority of the people who represent all the states in Washington do so secondarily behind their political career. And Republicans aren't right all the time, and Democrats aren't wrong all the time. They both have lots of good ideas. Most of the bills that I passed were bipartisan bills, proven working across the aisle. And the fact is what's right is right, and we ought to be fighting for that. And the ideology of being partisan is one of the things that's dividing this country. And career politicians have created this divisiveness. This country really isn't separated that far in most of the main issues, but our career politicians take and exaggerate those positions to enhance their own political career rather than to build a future for our kids and our grandkids. I'm in this race for the next 2 generations. I'm not in it for me. We need to be making some major changes in this country, and if we don't, we're going to suffer severe consequences if we don't do that.
But doesn't democracy demand compromise, and
Sure.
can a maverick compromise?
Sure, and what I would tell you is how in the world would I be able to pass more legislation as a term-limited maverick congressman than anybody else from the class of '94 unless I was able to do that? And I'm able to do that, but you have to build, you can't be partisan, and the one thing you'll never hear about me is I'm not partisan. I believe the labels are erroneous. I believe most of the people in Washington really care. But the one thing that they do care more about than they do the future of this country is their political career. And that's where term limits comes in. We need a citizen-based legislature that will look at the long-term problems that are facing this country, which are severe. I mean, $77 trillion is what the bill we're leaving our kids. We've got a $600 billion deficit. We had tax cuts, but nobody up there thought about maybe cutting back some of the spending. And so consequently, the tax cuts now are coming out of the hide of our children and our grandchildren.
But pre-9/11, didn't we have a surplus?
No, there's never been a surplus. That's all, again, career politicians telling us we've had a surplus. The way you measure a surplus is what is your debt at the end of the fiscal year? Does it go up or does it go down? Never since 1952 or 53 has our debt declined. And not even the Reagan era when they had the initial part of it had a surplus, the last Nixon. The fact is surplus is a game that they're playing. A surplus, we'll know we have a surplus when the total debt of this country declines. And it hadn't. Matter of fact, they eliminated the national debt clock when they started talking about it, and they put it right back once they figured out that was a sham. There was never a surplus in this country.
I want to ask you about negative campaigning when we get back, how you define it and whether or not you'll use it in your campaign with Brad Carson. We're on the verdict. Dr. Tom Coburn, candidate for the United States Senate, coming up. Welcome back to The Verdict. Mick Cornett with Kent Myers and our guest, United States Senate candidate Tom Coburn. When we left, I was going to ask you to speak about negative campaigning. How do you define it?
I think negative campaigning is when you try to undermine the character and virtue of your opponent. A comparison of votes is a legitimate comparison. A comparison of your actual representative actions in Congress is legitimate. I don't have any problems with that. But I don't doubt that Brad Carson's motives are good. I don't doubt that he's a loyal, faithful American. We see things totally opposite in terms of how best the government can interact with the populace.
But if you feel like your opponent is twisting your beliefs, will you attack him in a similar manner, or will you simply defend yourself?
I think I'll defend myself. There's plenty of vote differences, whether it's rating by the National Taxpayers Union on him getting D's and F's and me getting A's and B's in terms of protecting our future in terms of money. There's tremendous difference in our vision on pro-life and social issues, and our votes back that up. And a fair comparison of that is right. The thing is, again, I said earlier, how somebody campaigns is going to be how they govern. And all people have value, and all people have positive character traits, and we ought to be about the positive things and the difference in the vision, rather than undermining somebody's character or credibility. I think I did a fairly good job for Oklahoma in the 6 years I was there. Are there votes you can be critical of? Sure. I cast 4,000 or 5,000 votes during that period of time. But on a general, if you take the package together, mine is for less government and more freedom and individual liberties, and reining in the scope, the power, the size, and the impact of the federal government on our citizenry. And it's an important thing to do. It's really changed over the last 30 or 40 years. The government's impact on us is now you're guilty until you prove yourself innocent in terms of the paperwork demands. And if you just look at health care, 1 out of 3 people in this country who are performing health care services don't do anything to help anybody get well. The government has inhibited proper economic competitive nature of health care, and consequently we're seeing 14-15% rises in the cost, litigation that's uncontrolled, and most of that has been sponsored and fathered by an inefficient bureaucracy that could be doing it better.
You mentioned in the first part of your response about your pro-life position. I think it's well known you're a family physician, delivered almost 4,000 babies in the course of your career, and you are a pro-life advocate. There's been one quote that was widely circulated not too long ago that I have up on a graphic that I'd like to bring up, take a look at, and then ask you to comment and give any kind of explanation you'd like to. The graphic says, "I favor the death penalty for abortionists and other people who take life." Thanks for the graphic. That sounds rather harsh, and I know you've had other things to say about that.
Sure.
What can you tell our viewers?
The context of the question was, since you're so pro-life, how do you justify your position for the death penalty? And I made that statement, but I also qualified it. When we take innocent life, and our intention is to do that, we consider the death penalty everywhere else in our state and in our country as that being a significant punishment for that act. The fact is I know what the law is today, but when we actually have, as a nation, sanctioned the taking of innocent life, now almost 40 million babies, and done that because we're rationalizing one moral error with another, I think it's wrong. And I yearn for a day when we get back into perspective the value of life. And remember, it's not just about unborn life. It's about life at the end of age now, too, because we're starting to struggle with that issue. And as we devalue life at the beginning, we're seeing that we can't help but now start to devalue it at the end. Well, our seniors are worth us protecting them, and we need to be about that. So I would hope for a day when anybody who takes innocent life intentionally, with the one exception of trying to save somebody's life, that we should have equal and fair justice applied to that.
Undecided voters might want to know what's the big difference between the two candidates. How would you describe the difference?
Well, I think the first difference is the first votes we're going to cast when we're in the U.S. Senate. One's going to have Hillary Clinton and Ted Kennedy and Charles Schumer and Patrick Leahy controlling committees, and one's going to have conservative people who are going to put forth conservative thoughts.
Well, should Oklahoma voters take into consideration the national implications of your race?
This is going to be the race for control of the U.S. Senate in the United States. And so if they want a liberal United States Senate, led by Tom Daschle, and all the political philosophy that goes along with that, then they should vote for Brad Carson.
Okay. Well, that aside, the two candidates, you and Brad Carson, how do you differ?
The big difference. I believe in less government, less spending. I believe that we have to look long run. We can't use political gimmicks to enhance our own political careers. I believe we have to curtail spending. I believe we have to fix health care in this country. I think we have to pull in the excessive litigation that's associated with small business and health care. I believe we have to reform health care. I think we have to talk about it. I think we have to reform Social Security. I think we can keep our commitments to seniors and not hang our children. What's getting ready to happen in this country to our kids has never before happened before. We are undermining their standard of living, and every year we don't fix these problems means that we don't care about our children and grandchildren, and what we care about is ourselves. It's never before happened in this country. This country's been based on the ideas that we serve and we lead and we sacrifice for the future generations. It's not happening now. We need leadership to get it there. There are big differences on the social issues, from gay unions to life, to welfare reform, to issues associated with the scope and the field and the breadth of government, with tort reform. My goodness, I honestly believe, having been the brunt and seen excessive litigation, that if we don't do that, then we don't change the incentives in that, then we're going to be paying tons of money that's not going to be productive and not going to go around and solve the problems we want it to solve.
Tom, I know, of course, your original district was the 2nd district, but you're going all over the state. I know you've just been recently spending some time in western Oklahoma and northwestern Oklahoma. What kind of reception are you getting there? What kind of questions are you getting asked, and how do you feel about venturing over into that part of the state?
I'm real comfortable. Look, Oklahoma's people are wonderful. That's our greatest asset in this state is our people. We're hard workers, we're honest, straightforward, and they get it. They understand that the government's out of control. They understand that when we have congressmen who vote and senators who vote to spend $600 billion a year in money that we don't have, that our grandchildren are going to pay that back through a decreased standard of living. They're ready to have a new day of leadership where we really talk about the real problems that are facing us in the long term and not play the political games that have gone on so long in Washington. And I believe that's part of the reason that we got 61% in the Republican primary. Oklahomans get it. The federal government is out of control. Nobody's minding the store. And to say otherwise says you think the federal government's running efficiently.
We got about 30 seconds left in the show. I'll give you a chance for some final comments. Anything you didn't get to mention?
Well, I just think this race is going to be a great contrast between the role of the federal government in terms of what it should and should not be doing, and how we change that. And if people like the way it's running today, if they think that we ought to be spending their kids' future, and if they don't want leadership to try to change that, they shouldn't vote for me. If in fact they think it's time for a new day to where we really start thinking about the next 2 generations, we think about the real problems that are facing the country and not the political squabbles that divide so much of Washington, then I'd love to have their vote, because my intention is not to be a U.S. Senator, but to change America and change it better for all Oklahomans and get us back to what the Constitution said the federal government was supposed to be about.
Dr. Coburn, thanks for coming on The Verdict.
Mick, good to be with you.
Thank you so much.
Hoping to see you again before Election Day. Kent and I'll be back with the final word after this. Welcome back to The Verdict. Mick Cornett with Kent Myers here to wrap up our show with Tom Coburn.
We are facing here in Oklahoma a very, very important Senate race, not simply from a perspective of Oklahomans, but nationally. There's great national interest in this race. A lot of eyes are focused on it. A lot of people care outside of Oklahoma how Oklahoma votes. And in our verdict tradition, we're trying to bring our viewers both sides of the issues, as we always do. And next week, I'm pleased to say, we'll have Brad Carson on to give his views about the Senate race and some of the same questions we visited with Dr. Coburn about. Political scientists would call this race the perfect political race. We have two congressmen running against, one existing congressman running against each other from the same district, both of whom have made many votes in Congress and can be compared. They're both bright, they're both intelligent speakers, they're both personable, and the electorate is really fortunate to be able to put these two people side by side and say, okay, after considering everything, for whom am I going to vote? We're not going to try to tell you who that is, but we're going to try to give you the information you need to make that decision.
And potentially the control of the United States Senate up for grabs in the process.
Right here on this set.
Interesting. Brad Carson next week on The Verdict. See you then. Now,
Yeah, can we cut a 20-second promo?
you bet.
Whatever you want.
Other races are we going to want to do? Political races?
I don't know. I don't know. We don't.
We're rolling. Here we
Oh.
go. 5 seconds. Hello there, Mick Cornett with Kent Myers. Every Sunday morning at 9 o'clock, we host a show called The Verdict.
And this Sunday, we're going to have Dr. Tom Coburn, the Republican nominee for the United States Senate, in talking about his campaign.
Dr. Tom Coburn, this week on The Verdict, Sunday morning, 9 o'clock, right here on KSBI.
Should we do something different?
No.
Okay.
Here we go. Hello there, Mick Cornett with Kent Myers. Every Sunday morning at 9 o'clock, we host a show called The Verdict.
Watch this Sunday because we're going to have Dr. Tom Coburn, the Republican candidate for United States Senate, here talking about the campaign.
It's all coming up Sunday morning right here on KSBI. The Verdict. This week's guest, Dr. Tom Coburn.